Okay, everybody, we're going to start in on 2 weeks worth of information about affordable housing, in particular around the Beltline planning area, in the Beltline TAD, and in the city of Atlanta. And I'm starting with this first slide because one of the things that the Beltline does in all of their virtual meetings that they've been doing since the pandemic started, early on in the presentation, this is one of their first slides to let people know that there are rent relief programs, even mortgage and utility relief programs if because of the pandemic, you've lost your job and you're behind on your rent, mortgage, or utilities. It is a partnership with the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation and the United Way. And this is the address for the application. And if you need help with the application, people can call this phone number to get help. So one of the things the Beltline is doing is not just trying to encourage affordable housing, but is trying to help get information out during the pandemic about how people can keep from getting evicted or having their utilities cut off, those kinds of things.
Wonderful.
Okay, we're going to start with who needs affordable housing. Well, everybody would say the answer to that is everybody needs housing that is affordable to them. But by affordable housing, what we meant is people who needs affordable housing are people who pay more than 30% of their income for housing. That's considered you being cost burdened, meaning if you're paying 40 or 50% of your income for housing, which a lot of people do, then they may not be able to pay for food to stretch all the way through the month, or medical care, or they may have trouble repairing their car if they have transportation costs because their rent is so high or their mortgage is so high. An estimated 12 million renters and homeowner households now pay more than 50% of their annual incomes for housing. And this data is pre-pandemic. It's a few years old. So my guess is that it's more than 12 million now pay more than 50%. And a family with one full-time worker earning the minimum wage cannot afford a local fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment anywhere in the United States. It doesn't matter how small the town is you're living in. If you're working at minimum wage, you cannot pay the rent on a 2-bedroom apartment. Minimum wage, as you know, right now is $7.25. Now, what is affordable housing? Well, this has got a lot of words on the slide that I'll let you all read. But the main thing is that affordable housing refers to a continuum of different kinds of housing. Everything from emergency shelters to affordable home ownership, so that you're able to not pay more than 30% of your income on housing. But the main thing we're going to be talking about is non-market rental. That's also known as social or subsidized housing, meaning you're paying less than the normal market rent for that apartment. Now, HUD is the agency in the United States that sets the median household income by region. And so that is recognized in the United States as the agency that deems what your income must be in order to meet affordability guidelines. So HUD is the big agency, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency. Now, more about what is affordable housing. For the Beltline, this table and these paragraphs explain it. If you start with the highest for home ownership, The target households generally earn below 120% of AMI. Now, AMI means area median income. And if you remember from math class, median means half of the people make more than that and half of the people make less than that. It's not the average income, it's the median income. And for affordable rentals for Atlanta Beltline Inc., that generally means earning below 80% of the area median income. So at the high, 120%, and for renters, 80%. However, ABI also works closely with state and city agencies and the Atlanta Housing Authority to help make sure there's a mix of affordable housing for residents earning up to 60% of the median income. So the idea is there should be a range of affordability around and below the median income from 120% to 80% to 60% to 50% to 30%. And that gives a whole range of affordability options. Now, here's a table that is set up by HUD, Federal HUD agency. The fiscal year 2020 income limit area, and the area HUD designates is called the Atlanta, Sandy Springs, Roswell, Georgia metro area. Now that sounds very much north Atlanta. I don't know that it is all North Atlanta. That's just the way they've got it named. However, it's a big area, and you know that something in Roswell, the rent is going to be very different than the rent in West Atlanta. So, in a way, the fact that this is by such a big region is not as helpful as it could be if it was more targeted toward the area that you actually live in, a smaller, like maybe a zip code area. But that's not the way they do it. They do it by this big area. Now, they also go by the number of persons in the family. So the more people you've got in your family, the more you can make and still fall under these income limits, which makes sense. Now, on this chart, it shows that the median family income for this area is $82,700. But if you look over here by persons in family, you'll see that the 80%, below 80% for a family of four is $66,150 for last year. And the next income limit drops down 30% to very low income, and that's $41,350 for a family of four. And extremely low income, which generally means you're working minimum wage and you're the only person in your family working, or nobody in your family has got a job. And for a family of four, that is $26,200. Now, some recent trends in housing, and all of this information will probably ring true to you. You'll all be nodding, yeah, that makes sense. That's what I've heard. Housing is the largest expense for most families. In 2013, an average of 34%. So the average expense for housing is above what anybody should be paying at 30%. Homeownership rates are declining. In 2002, they were 71% of households owned a home. And by 2015, after the Great Recession, it was 63%. Rental demand is increasing and vacancy rates are decreasing. Now, that may have changed slightly during the pandemic. You've heard about so many people young people going back home to live in their parents' house in the basement during the pandemic. So I have not been able to find any good data for, how the pandemic has affected this right now. But hopefully once the pandemic is over, things will stabilize, but we'll probably still have rental demand increasing and vacancy rates decreasing unless something major happens. Residential land values are rising in urban areas. Housing supply is down. Anybody who looks on Zillow.com knows that there's very little posted right now for sale in a lot of areas, especially in town Atlanta. And costs are up. Now, in 2020, the Georgia median household income was $78,500. Now, the previous slide said it was $82,500. Well, that's because this slide is for all of Georgia, and the previous slide was that Atlanta metro area. And we all know that things cost, that people make a little bit more money in Atlanta than they do on the average throughout all of Georgia. Now, one of the things that I found that was really interesting, some extra information for this slide, is that many demographic groups saw this increase in renters, but the growth was particularly drastic for middle-aged households, Black households, and higher income households, which is not what I would have guessed. The authors of the article I was reading attribute that, especially among middle-aged households, to the lack of financial recovery after the Great Recession. People who had to take jobs after the recession where they were making a good deal less than they had made before the recession. The share of Black households renting increased 4 percentage points between 2001 and 2017. And those rates are about double the increase for white households in the same period of time. And higher income households moved from the second smallest income group renting in 2001 to the second largest group renting in 2017. Again, evidently because of the Great Recession. Now, here are a few more trends. And Peggy, I think the way this is going to work today, we've got time to stop after this slide for a couple of questions. We can stop maybe about once every 15 minutes or so.
Cool.
Questions. So again, on these recent trends, in 2014, after the Great Recession, but before the pandemic, the percentage of cost burden households for renters was 49%. So almost half of renters were cost burdened. Owners, 25%. So a fourth of people who own their own homes are cost burdened. Now, the change in low cost rentals in Atlanta over this 4-year period, which had a lot to do with the Great Recession, gross rent of less than $500 a month is very hard to find, and they lost nearly a little over 2,600 units in those 4 years of those lowest rental places. Gross rent above 500 and below 750 also went down almost 2,700 units, while gross rent of 1,500 a month or more went up by almost 5,000 units. And Fulton County leads the nation in the rate of home renters who were evicted or put on notice of eviction. And when I read about that, I dug a little deeper to find out more about it. And part of the reason for that is that the way things are set up eviction rules in Fulton County is that you can give somebody a notice of eviction if they're like 1 day late on their rent. And instead of sending late notices, a lot of landlords just send an eviction notice right away, because then they've got that history of having had eviction notices. And if the person continues being late on the rent, they've already moved forward in the eviction process. So we have this dubious distinction in Fulton County. Okay, questions for a couple of minutes.
Lucy, I have a question. First of all, I find it very difficult to believe that the average household income in the state of Georgia, the entire state, is what, 76,000 or 78,000?
Not the average, the median.
Oh, median. Oh, okay.
So that means half of the people in Georgia make more than that, and half of the people make less than that. The average could be very different.
Yeah, okay. And then this last line over here, I thought, at least I used to remember that they required 60 days before you could turn somebody out on the street. It wasn't like.
This is just to send a notice.
Yeah, that's what Lucy said, Tony. It's notification is the issue. So what landlords have started doing is the minute you're a day late, they notify.
Oh, okay. But that doesn't have any meaning. I mean, it's not like they can evict you the following day.
Oh, it has a lot of meaning because they've started a process, so they have a trail.
The 60-day clock starts.
Right.
Oh, I see. All right. All right. I'm with you now.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Yeah, I had a question about the number of people who are renting and stuff. I keep hearing in Atlanta, especially, that there's so many young millennials in Atlanta, and then there's so many older people who are downsizing and moving into the city, into a fancy apartment or something. So doesn't that make a difference in the numbers of people who are renting and the cost of rentals?
Yes, it does. You're absolutely right about that.
Because the millennials seem like around here anyway, the apartments that are going up are all expensive, very expensive apartments, and they're designed for young people who are maybe having roommates and too good salaries of young professionals or something.
Yes, that's exactly right. Anybody else?
That's true, but that's part of what makes it so difficult to find affordable housing for people who aren't making those two professional salaries.
Yeah, a lot of these young people don't want to be tied down to home ownership either. They want to be able to have a job in another city or just move quickly.
Right.
Yeah, I think nowadays the idea of staying with one company and getting a gold watch at the end of 30 years is long past us.
That's true. And staying in one place the way I have for over 40 years is rather unusual also.
Yeah.
In fact, young people today not only will change employers at least a half a dozen times, many of them will change occupations.
Exactly.
It's just amazing, the difference. It's just amazing.
You know, I noticed that trend way back in 1960 when I was hiring people out on the West Coast for jobs with this electronic company. And I would look at these resumes coming in. You know, back then you wore a coat and tie to go on an interview. And I would look at these resumes, and they were primarily in the aircraft industry. And apparently what they were doing, they would go from contract to contract to contract with these aircraft companies, North American, Douglas, Lockheed, Boeing, and, Northrop, but they were all out on the West Coast. And that was back in 1960. You know, when I was thinking at that time, I'm saying to myself, my God, doesn't anybody think of sticking around with a company? You know, that's the way I was brought up, to think you were going to retire from the company that you were hired into. So
things have changed a lot. And in
sure
order
have.
to finish on time, I probably need to move ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about affordable workforce housing. Affordable workforce housing is what is usually referred to by the Atlanta Beltline in their vision for affordable housing. And what that means is workforce housing is housing that is affordable to people who have jobs, but who would not be able to afford to live near the Beltline on the income they're making. For example, City of Atlanta police officers, City of Atlanta firefighters, Atlanta public school teachers, folks like that, who often work for the City of Atlanta, but have had to live in places like Douglasville and Lilburn and commute in to their jobs in town. So part of the idea of affordable housing around the Beltline is to allow those people who work in the city or work for the city to afford to live in the city also near the Beltline. So workforce affordable housing is a cornerstone of the Beltline vision. And the idea is that this would support a diverse workforce and ensure that the economic, cultural, and health benefits of living near the Beltline accrue to people of all income levels, not just people who make big salaries. So the City of Atlanta intentionally incorporated affordable housing by creating a legislatively mandated goal of creating 5,600 units of affordable workforce housing over the life of the program. And because it's 5,600 units of affordable workforce housing, people often think about that as the making 80% or less of the area median income. And this happens to be a picture of a new mixed income senior housing development in Adair Park over on the southwest side. It's a beautiful complex. This is the only picture I could find of it. There's some really nice landscaping, but this looks like it was taken in the rain, and it really doesn't show much of the beauty of the complex, but it's really nice. Now, the legislative framework, when the City Council set up the tax allocation district as a way to fund this new official City of Atlanta project, they made the assumption that there were going to be probably up to about 7 bond issuances that would be let by the City of Atlanta to pull down money in advance to help build the Beltline. And they set up that 15% of each of the TAD net bond proceeds would be dedicated to an affordable housing trust fund. So if a bond was let for $1 million, 15% of that $1 million, 150,000, if I've got that right, would be set aside to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And of course, you don't do a bond for $1 million. You do them for multi-million-dollar amounts. So the plan in the Atlanta Beltline redevelopment plan, which was written in about 2004 and 5, before the Great Recession and the real estate crisis hit, they projected that 15% of the net bond proceeds would bring in, by 2030, $240 million to incentivize developers to build affordable housing. It's not $240 million to build housing, because the Beltline doesn't build housing, but it was a trust fund for them to offer incentives to private developers to develop complexes that included affordable housing. Now, that funding was projected to support that 5,600 unit goal, with a subsidy of about $43,000 per unit. That's a pretty big subsidy, but it wasn't big enough because developers frequently turned it down. The 5,600 unit goal was based on 20% of the anticipated multifamily growth in the TAD. They guessed that in that between 5,000 and 6,000 acres of commercial and industrial property around the Beltline, those orange blobs that we saw around the map, that 2,800 new units of residential multifamily growth would occur where it hadn't been residential before. And they said 20% of that at a minimum has to be affordable. So that's where the 5,600 unit goal came from, not actual need. Nobody did a needs assessment and said we need 5,600 units of affordable housing. This is much more of a guesstimate, not based on need. Now, this is a photo of the lofts at Reynoldstown Crossing. Reynoldstown is the neighborhood just south of Inman Park, and it is on the north side of Memorial Drive. As you go into DeKalb, as you go in from DeKalb County into the city of Atlanta, you're going in often on Memorial Drive. It's just north of I-20. And I'm going to tell you more about this development in a number of slides as we go through this week and next week. Now let's talk about the challenges of that legislative framework and making all that affordable housing happen. The project is in a very different economic and funding context from the launch in 2005. And all of these bullets are from a thick document called the Affordable Housing Integrated Action Plan of 2015. So 10 years out, they had recognized that the economic and funding context was extremely different 10 years later. First of all, there was a legal challenge to the tax allocation district. An attorney in Atlanta who didn't think TAD should exist sued and halted the TAD for 3 years. So the TAD that was supposed to last 25 years didn't get started until the 4th year. So it really is just 22 years of TAD rather than 25. And about that same time, the Great Recession hit and everything tanked. So that's the two reasons for the really different economic and funding context. Now, we saw on a previous slide that originally they expected $240 million to come in over 25 years. 10 years in, 40% of the way through, only $13 million of that $240 million guesstimate, or 4% of the original guesstimated amount, had come in. So that was just devastating to the Beltline in terms of being able to get up and running and build things. And another thing that really hit is that the Beltline didn't have consistent access to two things that make it more likely to be able to develop affordable housing: new zoning requirements and land. They didn't own the land that these developers were developing on, so they couldn't require anything. All they could do was offer an incentive. And let's go on to the next slide and talk about the developments around historic Fourth Ward Park. Without owning the land or having any zoning requirement for affordability, 2/3 of the multifamily developments that had been built by 2015 had said no thank you to the incentives, so that there were only affordability in 2 of the 6 major multifamily developments. One of those happens to be Ponce City Market. There are a set aside of affordable apartments in Ponce City Market and one other near historic Fourth Ward Park. And the cost per unit of affordable housing is substantial. For rental development, a rent reduction of $400 below market rate affects the resale value of the unit by $80,000 a unit. Now, what that means, an example is if I own a $10 million apartment building near the Beltline, and the apartments are worth $250 million each. These are apartments, not condos. That means I have 40 units in a $10 million building. If I set aside 15% of those as affordable, that means 6 units I have to rent at $400 less than what I can charge everybody else for that apartment. And the resale value of the 34 remaining units is $8.5 million. The resale value of the 6 affordable units is $1,020,000. So basically what that means is a developer, if I had built that apartment and got it up and running and it was doing really well and I saw an opportunity to sell it and cash out, I would make $500,000 less selling that building than if I hadn't put any affordable units in it.
Lucy,
So that's part, yes.
do they tell you why the resale value goes down by $80,000?
I don't have the details on that.
Boy, I'm going to look into that because that's an interesting assumption, isn't it?
It really is. But if you're reducing the rent $400 a month below market value,
Okay.
think about if you reduced your mortgage by $400 a month, what your house would be worth if your mortgage was that much
and
less.
this, right. No, you're right. And this is, you're selling an apartment, not a property. So
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're selling a whole building of apartments. Okay, let's go on because we're running a little bit behind. Okay, now what has actually happened is that instead of 7 bonds maybe being issued by 2030, so far only 2 bonds have been issued. There was one in 2008, 2009, and another one at the end of 2016. And the reason is that because of the Great Recession and the real estate crash and the way the bond market has been, it hasn't been as reasonable to let bonds as would have happened if we hadn't had the recession and the real estate crash. Now, as of 2017, when this information is from, 25 million had come in from the TAD instead of that 13 million from the previous slide. So we're up to 10% of the anticipated funding has come in. And it was used, some for down payment assistance to allow people help to put a down payment on a single family home near the Beltline. Again, people who meet affordability criteria, they had to make 120% or less than the median income to qualify for that. And there weren't that many funds available for that down payment assistance. Also, they paid incentives to developers to put affordable housing in their complexes, and they started buying little chunks of property because they saw that not owning the land really meant they couldn't control affordability. And these are just pictures of some affordable units around town. This is Reynoldstown Senior. over in the Reynoldstown neighborhood, again, just south of Inman Park. This is Stanton Oaks. This used to be a 1960s one-story subsidized housing complex, and it was coming near the end of its useful life. It needed major overhaul, and it has been completely renovated and meets silver certification, LEED certification, leadership in environmental and energy design. So it's a very sustainable unit with good insulation and Energy Star appliances and double pane windows and those types of things. And then this is Phoenix House, a 69 unit development in Capitol View, which is on the south side of town. And it's a supportive living environment that provides long-term housing for those that are formerly homeless and may have mental health issues. Okay, let's talk about the second bond issuance that happened. The second bond issuance happened right at the end of 2016. And it was the first time they'd had a bond issuance since 2009. And it was for $155 million, a lot of money. Well, the two main things that money went for were refinancing of the 2009 bonds for a better interest rate and clearing the debt obligations the city had related to the resolution of payments in lieu of taxes to Atlanta public schools. You may have read 3 or 4 years ago a lot of articles in the paper about how the public schools were saying that the Beltline wasn't, the city on behalf of the Beltline was not paying the schools the money they should be getting. Well, that was because the agreement about how much would be paid annually was made on that original 2005 guesstimate of how much money would come in from the tax allocation district. And nowhere near the amount of money came in that people thought they would. So what happened is by about 2009, 10, 11, 12, in that area, there wasn't enough money coming in from the TAD to pay the debt obligation without shutting down the Beltline and just throwing their hands up and saying, we can't do this because of this debt we owe to the public schools. So the city and the schools were trying to renegotiate the agreement. And it took about 3 years to do that. And when it finally got done, they were able to use this bond money to pay off everything that they owed the Atlanta public schools, which was a lot of money. But the new agreement for the amount that would get paid to the public schools on an annual basis after 2017 was based on what they thought was going to actually be coming in rather than that more than 10-year-old guesstimate. And I go into all that detail because out of that $155 million bond, only $50 million was available to do anything else with. And they used it for affordable housing, creating jobs, and capital construction on the Beltline. About 11 million went to the 15% set aside for affordable housing. And when you added that to what ABI had committed from the TAD money coming in, regardless of the bonds, ABI had about $18 million to support affordable housing in 2017, 18, 19. So they made some progress on affordable housing in the last 3 or 4 years. And let's look how much progress has been made. At one time, we were reporting less than 1,000 affordable units had been developed. But after we were able to have that extra 18 million, this shows the affordable units created or preserved between 2006 and September of last year. And in the TAD, which really isn't shown on this map because it would be those orange blobs all the way around, 2,133 affordable units have been supported. So that's of the 5,600 units. But in addition, 1,042 affordable units have been developed in the planning area outside the TAD, but within a half mile of the Beltline. So together, 3,175 affordable homes are now within the walking distance of the Beltline, but only 2,133 is the number that goes toward that goal, because the goal is just in the TAD. Now, I looked at where those are because I thought I was interested in where they were, and I thought y'all might be too. So I looked at the addresses of all the affordable units that they gave addresses for, and I found that of the 2,133, they didn't give me an address for 650 of them. So I've labeled that just as various locations, but 1,000 of them are in Southwest Atlanta. I didn't find any reported as in Northwest Atlanta, 149 in Northeast, and 329 in Southeast Atlanta. Now that's in the TAD. In the planning area, the numbers are similar. A big number that I had no address for. The biggest next number was Southwest, then Northeast, then Northwest with couldn't find anything for Southeast. So here are the totals that get up to that 3,175. This is a picture on Wiley Street of a complex that's right next to the Beltline in Reynoldstown. This is a picture, oh, now I've forgotten. One of these is in Southwest and one of them is in Southeast. And I forget which is which. But I thought they were interesting photos of affordable units. Okay, I have gotten to my last slide. This one's a little complicated, and then we'll open up for questions. Community land trusts are one way to make housing affordable. So how do they work? The building, either residential or commercial, and it could be a condo or a single family house or a rental unit, or it could be a restaurant or a coffee shop. The building is owned by the individual who buys the building, but they only pay for the building, not the underlying land. And that makes purchasing the building more affordable. Now, who owns the land? The land is owned by a community land trust, which is governed by a nonprofit board. And they create a 99-year ground lease between the land trust and the owner of the building to ensure owner occupancy. So you can't buy the building and then not occupy it. And also to ensure responsible use and outline some fees that get paid to the community land trust. Now, the reason this makes it more affordable at the beginning is because you're not paying for the land. Well, what about when you turn around and you want to sell the building? Well, there's a resale formula built into the ground lease that's designed to keep homes affordable for buyers in the future. But it doesn't mean you can't make a profit on the increase in the value of the building. So if I owned a condo or a house through the land trust, I bought it for less than what the one next door would have cost because I didn't buy the land, and I live in it for 10 years and decide I need to move and I'm going to sell it. Well, I have to go by the formula, but say the property in 10 years is, if you look on Zillow, it's worth, say, 20% more than what it was when I bought it. Well, the resale formula tells how much of that 20% is because of owning the house and how much of that 20% is because of owning the land. And I can make the profit when I sell the house off the house, just not any profit on the land. So that means when somebody buys the house next time, it still sells for less than the house next door because the person is not buying the land. Now, I know that's complicated, but most things about affordable housing are extremely complicated. I started off knowing nothing about affordable housing, and it's taken me 10 years to get the little inkling that I have about how this works. And it's just extremely complex. So I'm going to leave it here for today and let Peggy open it up for questions. And we can talk about any of the things, the challenges we talked about, the bond issuances, the number of units, whatever you want to ask questions about.
You want to stop sharing, Lucy?
Oh, yeah, let me do that.
Okay, Paul, go for it.
I was wondering, what is, or is anything being done to keep up the so-called affordable units in time? Is there money allocated? Because what I have seen, for example, in cities like New York, etc., once you have some kind of a decrease in the rent for whatever reason, the upkeep disappears and all these things go to pot. So I was wondering, how is that going to be prevented along the Beltline?
There is some information about that in next week's class, but let me go ahead and just let you know that there are some funds that are set aside through a variety of different ways to help people keep their properties up to code or up to whatever the standard is in the community, if it's better than code. In terms of rental units, it really has to do with the developer. And because the rental units are in mixed income developments, where 85% or 90% of the renters are paying full market rate, and only 10 or 15% are paying a reduced income, they are not allowed to let that 10 or 15% of those units go to pot, as you say, while they keep everybody else's plumbing and paint fresh and new. It has to be comparable. They have to keep everything up, or they can't rent at market rates for as high as they would normally be able to. Now, in terms of a slumlord that owns a building that's got really low cost rental units in it, there isn't really anything the Beltline can do to try to keep that landlord from letting the building go down. However, because land around the Beltline is becoming more valuable, in a lot of cases, developers are coming in and wanting to buy out those rundown properties to put something up new. So that doesn't completely answer your question, but I hope it addresses it some.
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else?
You guys are quiet.
Yeah, from being so rowdy at the beginning.
I know.
We are thinking.
Okay.
We got a lot of information we have to progress.
It is. And this is information that is not really easy to digest because it is so complex.
Hey, Lucy, is there any, one of the things I worry about is that the developer, the contractor / developer has high incentive to build high quality products. I mean, high quality developments.
Mm-hmm.
I always worry about the pass off between the developer and the manager, because the developer ain't going to manage an apartment complex, right? They're going to pass it to somebody who's going to manage that property.
Right.
I'm assuming there's not a whole lot of requirement that gets put in place about what that manager has to.
Actually, there is.
Good.
Because the manager is the one that is required to keep all of the units comparable in terms of upkeep.
Okay.
The management company is the one that takes the rental applications and has to determine whether or not somebody meets the qualifications
Fair enough.
for the affordable unit. So when the developer hires the manager, they have to put in those requirements in the contract for the management company, or then the developer will be in default of the contract that was put in when they bought the land.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Thank you.
Okay.
You know what I like on it, if I understood that right, in one building, you will have a percentage for low income units available, and the rest are regular, whatever the rent is, which will help with having slums grow and build up, you know, where traditional, they just move them on the outskirts of city, and if you're low income, you live in the slums where they have wood in front of the window because the glass is broken.
You're exactly right. And that is the reason the Beltline is so determined for there to be mixed income housing, rather than just housing for the wealthy, housing for the middle class that's different, and housing for the poor that's very different.
And what
the other thing besides that is that think about the impact on the children who live in those slums on the outskirts of town that you mentioned. Those kids don't see the result of somebody getting a good education and getting a good job and being able to do better in the future. It's self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm poor and I'm going to stay poor forever.
Right.
But if you live in some place where everybody's not poor, then you may think, hey, I'm poor now, but maybe I don't have to stay that way.
It goes the same way, you know, if the manager is responsible, everybody else, it will not happen that garbage is sitting outside and, you know, nobody washes windows and leaves junk outside. So I like that idea. I think that's great.
Me too.
Paul? Go ahead, Paul.
The concept is beautiful. My question is, does it work?
There are many mixed use developments all around me that are wonderful, actually. And people who are invested in their environment are the ones that create the community that engages folks who are learning to be invested in their environment. There's no nirvana. Okay, so I don't want to be like, but the mixed use is hugely important in moving forward in terms of trying
Yes,
to lift up folks who
I
are at a
agree
lower
with that.
economic level.
Because if I'm sloppy and everybody else is neat, it will bring me that I said, I need to be a little cleaner around here or a little neater and to fit in.
It even impacts, we have a public housing development just up the street from us. And that's where everyone who's poor lives in the same place, right? I mean, you put all the poor people together, you put them in a low income housing development and they all are there and everybody's poor and everybody feels poor, okay? But even here with Trestle Tree, as frustrating as it might get sometimes, it is the surrounding community that tries, okay, not always successfully, but tries really hard to influence what they see and what they and some of our people who work with that housing development will say to you, everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants a clean, nice, safe environment for their children and family. And it's just, we're all trying to get there a different way, but it's not easy when everybody is together. I mean, public housing is not my favorite thing. You guys have heard me talk a lot about that, but even in that situation, the external community is having an influence on that particular project.
Thank you for speaking up about that, Peggy, from your own personal experience. I will let you know, Paul, that we're going to talk more about this next week and talk more about different ways of creating affordable housing and what works and what doesn't. But Peggy's personal statement about it probably is more helpful than all the information I'm going to provide next week.
I don't know, they think I'm biased, but at least.
Well, we
Totally
all know that
biased.
public housing doesn't really work when you cluster a number of poor people in one area. I mean, there's no incentive
work.
to do anything.
We learned that.
If they're around people that have income and have made it, quote unquote, that gives them the incentive to do likewise.
Yes.
And I think that's been proven a number of times throughout the United States. I mean,
Yeah,
all you
we
gotta do is
saw
look at
the
public
first,
housing in a number of cities. And,
we saw the first public housing development in the country set up here in Atlanta with Techwood Homes.
Right.
Really?
Around
30,
somewhere
40,
around
35.
the 40s. It was during, it was in the Roosevelt's, one of
Right.
Roosevelt's terms. So I don't know whether it may have been before the war. And everything we learned through the 50s, 60s, 70s is that doesn't work well for anybody. It doesn't work well for the people who live there. It doesn't work well for the building. It doesn't work well for the community. You just end up with slums and breeding grounds for crime.
The previous Atlanta Housing Authority director is the one who tore down a huge number of those. In fact, that one, a huge number of those.
All of the public housing that used to be like that. Techwood Homes,
right.
Carver Homes, Capitol Homes,
right.
all of those, the Bankhead complex, they've all been torn down.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're all being rebuilt as some kind of mixed income. Now, if it's the Atlanta Housing Authority, they may not have any market rate apartments, but they'll have a mix. It won't be everybody who has 30% and below of area of median income. It will be some people at 30%, some people at 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So there is a range of incomes even in housing authority developments.
Right.
And the housing authority is partnering with Atlanta Beltline. We'll
Right.
talk about that in 2 locations next week.
It's really
to
cool,
de-
actually. Yeah.
Yeah, to develop mixed income housing.
Cool. Great.
Thank you, Lucy.
Lucy, I appreciate all you do and all the research you do, and thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, you're very welcome. I got interested in it because I live close to it. I got interested 15 or more years ago now, and I learn more about it every day.
Do you
Understood.
live on the Beltline?
Yes, I live 237 steps from the Beltline.
Okay.
My dog and I counted it one day.
She's making me want to go count how many steps. Only I realize that I'd have to turn a corner right now because the development across the street from me, I can't cross it yet.
Lucy, tell me one thing. Is that in dog steps or human steps?
My dog and I have a pretty, and now with 4 legs, it's probably,
Okay, I was just wondering about that.
more steps for the dog. So it's
Okay.
human steps.
Well, I just need you to know we appreciate you very, very, very
Yes.
much. I've learned things I didn't know, and I plan to send the link out to my people for the SSD information. So there you go.
Great.
Lucy, I
Right.
have a question. When we go back to almost at normal, when we all can meet together again, and will you be maybe the bus driver and telling us?
I won't be
Not
the driver.
the- I didn't mean the driver.
I do
meant-
not drive the bus, but I plan to go back to being a tour guide as
Tour
soon as
guide.
they
Sorry,
as soon
I
as they
misspoke.
open them back up.
That would be
That
wonderful.
would be wonderful.
Yeah.
I like to meet you in person.
Well, I would like to get the chance to meet all of y'all in person too. That would be great.
Thank you, Lucy. We
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank you.
All right. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
I